You're not lazy. You're not broken. If you understand what's wrong but still can't act, this video is about action paralysis. Like, subscribe, and let's begin. You are not broken, you're not lazy. You're not broken. If you're doing nothing while fully understanding what's happening, that's not a failure, it's a normal reaction. This matters because blame shuts attention down. The moment you tell someone, "This is your fault," they stop listening. So let's be precise. Laziness assumes something simple, that there is a clear action in front of you, an obvious next step, and you're consciously refusing to take it. But that's not your situation. You don't see one path. You see consequences. You see how decisions stack. How timing matters. How one move can close doors that don't reopen. And because you see that, your nervous system doesn't read inaction as weakness. It reads it as restraint. As not making things worse. Nothing is missing in you. Nothing needs to be fixed. Your mind is responding to risk, not physical risk, but irreversible risk. Risk to time. To identity. To future options. At some point, action stopped being something you try and became something that defines you. And when every decision feels like a permanent statement about who you are and where your life is going, hesitation becomes logical. This state doesn't feel chaotic. It feels heavy. Quiet. Tense. Controlled. You're not confused. You're aware. And awareness without safety doesn't create movement. It creates stillness. So if you're stuck despite understanding, that doesn't mean you lack discipline. It means your system adapted to an environment where acting carelessly is more dangerous than not acting at all. You are not broken. You're responding exactly the way a thinking system would in a world that punishes mistakes harder than inaction. When action stops feeling safe, we're told a simple story about inaction. That it comes from fear. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of getting it wrong. But that story skips the beginning. Fear doesn't appear first. Before fear, there's understanding. The moment you realize that action isn't neutral. That every step commits you to something. That some mistakes don't teach, they brand. You stop choosing between good and bad outcomes. You start choosing between different kinds of loss. Every option carries weight. Every path closes others. Every move feels like a commitment you might not be able to undo. And once you see that, movement stops feeling empowering. It starts feeling exposed. Because action no longer means trying, it means declaring something permanent. About your direction. About your priorities. About who you are willing to become. So hesitation begins before fear ever shows up. It begins the moment you understand that the system doesn't forgive experiments. That there's no safe way to test the waters. No low-cost failure. No clean reset. In that environment, inaction changes meaning. It's no longer avoidance. It's restraint. It's choosing not to touch something that could break permanently in your hands. This is the reversal most people miss. You don't freeze because you're scared to act. You freeze because acting taught you that the margin for error disappeared while the consequences grew. And when every step feels like a verdict, standing still becomes the only position that doesn't immediately judge you. The curse of understanding: you analyze. You compare. You double-check. You delay. From the outside, it looks like hesitation. From the inside, it feels like responsibility. Because you don't act blindly anymore. You see systems. You see incentives. You see how outcomes depend on factors that aren't written down anywhere. The better you understand how things actually work, the harder it becomes to move. Not because you lack desire, but because you see the full chain of consequences. Understanding multiplies futures. Every choice branches. Every branch carries risk. Every risk has a cost that might show up years later. So awareness doesn't simplify decisions. It overloads them. And at some point, clarity turns against you. Because now you're not just choosing what to do. You're choosing what you're willing to lose. Time. Momentum. Reputation. Alternative lives you'll never get to test. This is where paralysis quietly sets in. Not as panic. Not as fear. But as delay that feels reasonable. You tell yourself you're being careful. That you're waiting for more information. That one more comparison will make things clear. But clarity never arrives. Because the problem isn't missing data. The problem is that there is no safe option. So thinking becomes circular. Not because you enjoy it, but because thinking keeps decisions suspended. As long as you're analyzing, nothing is final. Nothing is locked in. Nothing can be proven a mistake. This is why paralysis often hits the most aware people first. The ones who see how fragile trajectories are. The ones who understand that small choices can permanently reshape a life. You're not stuck because you don't understand enough. You're stuck because you understand too much. A world that doesn't forgive the problem isn't choice. The problem is what choice has become. There was a time when mistakes were part of the process. You tried. You failed. You adjusted. Failure taught you something and didn't define you forever. That world is mostly gone. Now every mistake feels recorded. Archived. Searchable. One wrong move can follow you for years. One bad decision can erase momentum. One misstep can close doors that never reopen. So action stops feeling experimental. It starts feeling final. You don't step forward thinking, I'll learn something. You step forward thinking, what if this labels me permanently? This is the hidden pressure most people live under. Not the fear of failing once, but the fear of failing in a way that sticks. Because the system no longer forgets. It doesn't reset. It doesn't give clean second chances. And the human brain wasn't built for that. It was built for trial and error. For feedback. For correction. When those mechanisms disappear, the mind adapts. It becomes conservative. Cautious. Reluctant to commit. Not because it's weak, but because it's protecting what little flexibility remains. In a world where mistakes aren't temporary, hesitation becomes a survival strategy. And paralysis stops looking like a flaw. It starts looking like a rational response to an environment that stopped forgiving. When the mind turns against itself, your mind isn't your enemy. It's trying to protect you. When the environment becomes unpredictable and unforgiving, the brain switches strategy. It stops pushing forward and starts calculating. It looks for the perfect moment. The optimal move. The version of action that guarantees safety. But that moment doesn't exist. So the search never ends. At first, this feels like intelligence. Like responsibility. Like being careful instead of reckless. You gather more information. You compare paths. You run scenarios. Each step feels productive. But nothing moves. Because the goal quietly shifts. You're no longer trying to act. You're trying to eliminate risk. And risk can be eliminated. So thinking turns inward. Every answer creates more questions. Every insight reveals more uncertainty. Instead of opening paths, analysis begins to close them. Not by force, but by weight. The more you think, the heavier each option becomes. Until even the smallest step feels dishonest. Because acting would mean admitting that you don't know enough. That you can't guarantee the outcome. So calculation becomes a refuge. As long as you're thinking, nothing is final. Nothing is lost. Nothing can be judged a mistake. This is why paralysis doesn't feel chaotic. It feels controlled. But it's not control. It's suspension. You're not avoiding action because you don't care. You're avoiding the moment where uncertainty becomes real. And once the mind learns that thinking delays consequences, it keeps thinking. Even when it costs you movement. Why these worlds pull you in. This is why certain worlds feel so magnetic. Games. Post-apocalyptic settings. Empty, broken, simplified realities. Not because they're darker. Not because they're easier. But because they respond. You act, and something happens. You make a mistake, and you see it. You try again, and the world adjusts. There is feedback. Consequences are clear. Bounded. Understandable. A bad choice doesn't erase your future. It teaches you something. It shapes the next move. Action has form again. In post-apocalyptic worlds, this becomes even more explicit. There's no illusion of safety. No hidden systems. No delayed judgment. Action equals survival. Inaction equals loss. No ambiguity. And that clarity is calming. Not emotionally, neurologically. Because the brain doesn't need comfort. It needs response. This isn't escapism. You're not running away from reality. You're searching for an environment where action still makes sense. Where effort doesn't disappear into silence. Where choices aren't judged years later by systems you can't see. These worlds strip complexity down to something the human mind can actually work with. And when you return to real life, the contrast is brutal. You act, and nothing answers. Or the response comes too late, too distorted, too disconnected to learn from. So your nervous system remembers where action worked. Where movement had meaning. And it pulls you back there. Not because you want fantasy, but because reality stopped replying. Responsibility without agency. Here's the core of it. Action paralysis isn't a lack of will. It isn't low energy. It isn't a character flaw. It's what happens when responsibility exists without real agency. You're told that your life is your responsibility. Your choices. Your outcomes. Your failures. And that part is never questioned. But what's quietly removed is control. You don't control the rules. You don't control timing. You don't control the systems that decide what counts and what doesn't. Algorithms. Markets. Institutions. Gatekeepers. So you're asked to choose, but not allowed to influence the conditions under which your choices are judged. This creates a contradiction the mind can't resolve. Responsibility implies power. But here, responsibility is detached from it. And when that happens, action stops feeling like agency and starts feeling like exposure. Because if you fail, it won't be read as bad luck. It won't be read as experimentation. It will be read as you. Your judgment. Your competence. Your worth. So the psyche adapts. It presses pause. Not out of rebellion. Not out of fear. But because committing in a system you can't affect feels irrational. Why take a step when the outcome isn't truly yours? Why risk permanence when you don't get a say in the verdict? Paralysis isn't resistance. It's what remains when responsibility keeps increasing and agency keeps shrinking. And once you see that, the problem stops looking internal. It looks structural. Adaptation, not failure. You're not stuck. You adapted. You didn't stop acting because you lost something inside yourself. You stopped because the environment taught you that action is costly, feedback is unreliable, and mistakes are permanent. So your system adjusted. It learned that waiting hurts less than committing. That stillness protects more than movement. That doing nothing creates fewer irreversible outcomes than doing something wrong. This isn't confusion. It's calibration. In a world where action doesn't guarantee meaning, where effort doesn't guarantee response, and where consequences arrive late, distorted, or unfair, inaction becomes logical. Not comfortable. Not fulfilling. But rational. You didn't freeze because you couldn't move. You froze because moving stopped making sense. And as long as the world keeps demanding responsibility without returning agency, stillness will continue to feel like the most honest response available. Not because you gave up, but because you learned.